Good evening. Welcome to the October 2nd meeting of the Ann Arbor City Council. If you're able, please rise and join us for a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Would the clerk please call the roll of council?
Councilmember Kalasapati?
Here.
Councilmember Frenzel? Here. Councilmember Westfall? Here. Councilmember Lum? Here. Councilmember Grand?
Here.
Councilmember Ackerman?
Here.
Mayor Taylor?
Here.
Councilmember Eaton?
Here.
Councilmember Crapel?
Here.
Councilmember Warpahowski?
Here.
Councilmember Smith?
Here.
We have a quorum.
May I have a motion, please, to approve the agenda? Moved by Councilmember Smith, seconded by Councilmember Warpahowski. Discussion of the agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The agenda is approved. Do we have communications today from our city administrator?
We do, Mayor. There are 4 items attached to the agenda. The notes from the Economic Development Forum that we held on September 12th. There's also a memorandum concerning the 2018 Deer Management Planning Efforts and Objectives. I've also included the City Administrator's update and then the agenda response memo. But beyond those, I want to relay that I had the opportunity this afternoon to speak with Susan Pole of the Downtown Development Authority. And this is in response to the concern about the security of our parking decks and the unfortunate events of people jumping off of them. Ms. Pole is going to go ahead and direct the her engineer to do go back and ask the potential offers on the fencing to be put on top decks to get a price and then to go forward with it. She has a meeting of her executive committee and then the board on Wednesday. At that point, she'll ask them to approve and ratify the actions taken. Our conversation this afternoon was reflective of the council's priority to address the security of the top level of our decks as quickly as possible and in response to the item that council passed at its last meeting. So I wanted to pass that along so that council members can feel assured that we are proceeding with all due diligence, but will require some leeway, mostly from the DDA board, to ratify the actions that Ms. Pole is taking.
Thank you. We now have an introduction that is with respect to Energy Efficiency Day 2017. It's normally my custom to come to the podium and read with a member from the community with respect to proclamations. This was brought to us by a member of the community, and through a fault of mine, I neglected to communicate out that it was necessary for folks to come on out and receive the proclamation. So with council's indulgence, I'll merely, and in light of the fact that Energy Efficiency Day is October 5th and is between now and our next meeting, I'll read the proclamation in commemoration of our community's earnest regard to move forward on energy efficiency, to move forward on climate action, and with respect to the good work done by the resident members of the Environmental Commission and the Energy Commission. Whereas energy efficiency is the art of getting the same or better performance, using less energy, all the while cutting utility bills for residential, business, and industrial customers. And whereas reliable, affordable energy is vital to our economic prosperity and energy, and it is most productive and cost-effective way to meet our energy needs. Whereas implementing clean energy policies and programs help boost economic opportunities and job creation, while continuing to move forward towards a sustainable future. And whereas more than 2.2 million Americans work in the energy efficiency sector in local, good-paying, clean energy jobs that cannot be outsourced, and increasing energy efficiency will increase more of them. And whereas a nationwide network of energy efficiency groups and partners has designated October 5th as the nation's second annual Energy Efficiency Day. And whereas together the residents of Ann Arbor can continue to contribute to our sustainability efforts by learning more about energy efficiency and practicing smarter energy use in their daily lives. Now, therefore, I, Christopher Taylor, Mayor of Ann Arbor, Michigan, do hereby proclaim October 5th, 2017 as Energy Efficiency Day and urge citizens to join us in supporting our clean energy goals and moving towards a more energy-efficient future right now. So that's the proclamation. With respect to Energy Efficiency Day, I'd encourage folks to read up on what they can do to improve their energy efficiency. We have lots of good ideas on the city website, and certainly there are many devoted members of the community who are engaged in this effort. So please don't be shy. We now come to public comment reserved time. Public comment reserved time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment reserved time, one needs to have signed up in advance by contacting the city clerk. Speakers will have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time clock. Speakers are not authorized to delegate their time to others. As a matter of courtesy, we may have only one person speaking at a time. And finally, if you require assistance in speaking before council, we'd be delighted to provide it to you. Our first speaker today is Laura Stroh. Stroh.
Like the beer.
I should have quit while I was ahead.
Yes. I'm Laura Stroh. I live at 1327 Broadway. I am here as the Broadway neighborhood representative with a 3D scale model to talk about the proposal known as 1140 Broadway. Tonight, you will have the first reading for the zoning change the developer is requesting. We in the neighborhood insist that you reject this zoning change. You will see, if you haven't already, the developer's PR pictures which show the buildings at advantageous angles. We wanted to give you a visual aid from the neighborhood's perspective. This is Building A, the largest and tallest of the 3 proposed buildings. It's 8 stories high with a footprint of over 72,000 square feet, 286 units in this building with a parking garage in its core with 451 spaces. Building A alone is the largest residential building in the city outside of the downtown campus area. If you are driving over the Broadway Bridge after this is built, you will no longer see the beautiful Broadway Hill. Notice how completely it dwarfs the two historic houses next to it. It will put in permanent shade the section of Traver Creek it abuts, as well as the path next to it. We are grateful to the developer for lowering Building A's arms from 5 stories to 4 and cutting off 17 feet of one of those arms so that he could legally put in a path outside the wetland buffer. But we would have preferred a closer adherence to the master plan, which calls for the entire building next to the creek to be 4 stories. This building, along with the 2 other proposed buildings, constitutes a downtown-sized development. If it were downtown, the parcel would have had the protection of a D2-like overlay zoning that would have given the historic Broadway residential area a buffer between the tall buildings on Wall Street and the small residences on Broadway. But it is not downtown, so we don't have an appropriate zoning. The developer is asking for C1AR zoning, which is described in the city code as campus commercial and residential, intended to add dense residential usage to the campus business district near the central core of the city. This site is not campus, nor is it near the central core. Furthermore, this proposal is far from the described mix of residential and commercial, with only 1% commercial, and that only if Phase 3 goes through. This zoning category was chosen for one reason. Because of its lack of restrictions, it allows the developer to build whatever he wants. If we allow this zoning change, we have essentially let the developer be our de facto city planner. As such, he has planned a development that violates the master plan in almost all of its important recommendations. The conditions the developer has added to the zoning merely describe his proposal. They offer little protection to the neighborhood. We in the neighborhood welcome development on this site, but please reject this C1AR zoning.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next speaker is Steve Kaplan.
Hi, my name is Steve Kaplan. I live on 406 North Division, and I'm actually here to speak in favor of changing the PUD for this same site. There may or may not be problems with if there are issues that someone has with the building. As I understand it tonight, what's being considered is how it's zoned, and currently the PUD zoning is merely a legacy from a project that never was built, and doesn't really fit the desire of this city, nor has it for several years. We've been doing it in every other meeting or planning session I've been a part of. We've been steering away from PUDs. So this is kind of a messy piece of unfinished business from a long time ago. It doesn't fit what's currently being contemplated for the site. I think that the proposed risks of C2AR for this particular building are somewhat alleviated by the proposals of the developer to make his zoning conditional on this project and this project alone. So if what's being built is amenable, and I think that you all get the chance to decide that at some point soon, then great. But if not, if something else is wrong, then this zoning doesn't keyhole a new unforeseen development from being built to the sky by any stretch of the imagination. So I think that risk is being blown out of proportion. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Nirmala Hanka.
Good evening, Nirmala Hankey from Ward 3, Nonviolent Strategies. Today is the 148th anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi's birth. Is this city willing to follow in his footsteps of finding nonviolent solutions to our problems, or are we going to continue down the path of killing more deer and doing nothing to try nonviolent strategies for living, coexisting peacefully with the deer? Why are nonviolent preventative strategies continuing to take a backseat to killing? Why is nothing being done to prevent damage to private property by the deer? Things like deer-resistant gardening and changing fencing ordinances. Why has signage for deer not been increased from 4 signs in the entire city? If we want to decrease deer vehicle collisions, why no more signage? This year, the proposal is to kill 250 to 350 deer, and preventative measures like increasing signage, changing fencing regulations, and deer-resistant gardening are still being worked on. Apparently, the city finds it easier, though vastly more expensive, to kill and sterilize deer than to implement simple, nonviolent measures that are way less expensive. Putting violence first, killing deer, sterilizing deer, with nonviolence a distant third, is a bit like insisting that North Korea be destroyed rather than working on diplomatic efforts first to avoid a violent solution. Violence is not a viable solution, not in North Korea and not for our deer in Ann Arbor. We are going headlong into more violence, killing more deer, and paying lip service to nonviolent strategies that could decrease deer vehicle collisions and save people's favorite plants. We are upholding the federal regulation for no shooting within 1,000 feet of our schools. Why then does the city now think it is okay to lift the 450-foot rule for private property in order to kill more deer? Presumably, any shooting of deer near a school would be at night when no one is present. Yet the city thinks it will be safe to shoot on private property with no restriction, not 400 feet, not any feet. Imagine for a moment that you live next door to a neighbor in Ward 1 or 2 who has given the city permission to kill deer on their property. How would you feel about that? How safe would you be? How will you be informed of the shooting? When will it occur? Where will it occur? What will you tell your children when they hear gunshots in the night? Are the shooters really going to stay in the, quote, shooting lanes and not follow a deer who crosses over into your backyard? Where is the transparency in this all too likely scenario? The city has said that they would not even report after the fact where shooting on private property occurred. Is the city going to tell the neighbors anything at all? Killing deer on private property will pit neighbor against neighbor. Is that what we want? Mahavir, the Jain prophet who 2,500 years ago inspired Gandhi's nonviolent path, said, and I quote, "Do unto others as you would like to be done. Injury or violence done by you to any life in any form, animal or human, is as harmful as it would be if it caused to your own self.
Thank you.
Do not injure and abuse. Let's stop the killing." Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Sabra Sanzota.
Good evening, Council. Today, I spent desperate hours waiting for news from a family member who was trapped in a classroom with his students in the MBA program of USC because there was an announcement of a mass shooter in the building. The students hid under their desks, texting home to tell their parents when the SWAT team arrived, etc. He was fine today, and we counted our blessings. The point is, guns and outbursts of violence destabilize our security, make us fearful. And so today, to segue, my point is about the proposed sharpshooting in the neighborhoods this winter to kill up to 350 deer. That planned bloodshed and gunfire is now proposed to happen virtually in my backyard. It is secretly planned for the backyards of neighborhoods in wards 1 and 2. The locations are not disclosed. The city will not ask the permission of the neighbors. They might be shooting across your yard to hit a deer. They might shoot your dog, or worse. The 450-foot safety distance between private property and a shooter will be cast aside because it's no longer a state requirement, apparently. And Ann Arbor doesn't have the political will anymore, it might seem, to self-impose safety measures above the state minimum. I've participated in the deer management meetings with city staff, and it was a noble cause to bring diverse parts of the community together to build a deer management plan that everyone could live with. But that plan failed. The report you received today makes recommendations about the slaughter and geography of the proposed neighborhood cull on a magnitude that has our community in a state of shock. It recommends killing between 250 and 350 deer in wards 1 and 2. That's up to 4 times the slaughter that you started with in year 1. The exact size of the herd is still unknown. The size of the acceptable final deer count has never been stated. All these unknowns should prevent this plan from proceeding. The survey this year that you did doesn't really point to residents wanting to eradicate the deer. It doesn't say that people want to wipe out the deer, but people don't want hunters running through their backyards and blood all over their driveways. This plan involves using private properties as a base for the bait and slaughter. The neighborhoods of the private property owner hosting the slaughter won't be notified by the city until the last minute, if at all. The city's proposal makes the job of the resident who hosts the slaughter, makes it his job to notify the neighbors, but what if he doesn't? What if the neighbors are against it? The adjacent neighbors, which could be me or any other Ward 1 or 2 resident, will either be disregarded or surprised by the lethal activity. Please vote against the expansion of the budget, which will be for the increased slaughter.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Kermit Schlansker.
I have 2 grandchildren that profited greatly from school projects. One worked on software for fighting robots, became a software giant, and got a really good employment deal. The other one worked on the solar car and got a good job as an engineer at Chrysler. We need to create a powerful source of action toward global warming, and that could be the school system. We need advocates, and the mayor and the council could be the most powerful advocates of all with a series of phone calls. Their role would be to contact the governor and the heads of various school organizations in an effort to get support. The simple message would be, we want to put alternate energy education and serious energy projects into the school system. A more exact message could be formed with the help of the Energy Committee. More advocates could be obtained by expanding the size of the Energy Committee and allowing it to recruit more advocates. Students on campuses are a huge source of advocates, and an organization of students could be formed by the Energy Committee. One of the objectives would be to create a lot of Thomas Edisons by giving them projects to work on. As the movement spreads through the school system, it will create a nation of experimenters creating new jobs. College credit is an enormous logical motivating force that could really make a massive movement in making sustainable energy happen. This credit should be obtainable from UMich, EMU, Washtenaw Community, and wherever, the public school system, high school students are perfectly capable of working on energy projects. The University of Michigan has deep pockets and would be a powerful source of academic motivation against global warming and poverty. The course must have a class part of it, but also a lab course in which the student helps to build a working project. A suitable project could involve a solar mirror power source on top of this building or any other suitable building or on the ground. Solar mirrors can collect both heat and power, and that makes them totally useful in this climate. Solar voltaics are not enough. Projects must go past that. The whole school system could build an off-grid apartment building or do brain work on a multiple product factory powered partly by solar energy. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker today is Adam Brent.
Thank you very much for your attention. My name is Adam Brent. I'm the founder and CEO of Cocoa Compost, a revolutionary composting company. First and foremost, I am an expert in composting. I have developed proprietary composting systems and technology for cocoa compost, and most importantly, cocoa was selected to participate in, quote, one of the most exciting studies for the Great Lakes Protection Fund that will explore using compost to create a local, sustainable, circular economy that increases jobs and food production while lowering nutrient water pollution into the Great Lakes. As I mentioned in my previous presentation, the city's compost site has become a quasi-landfill. I have Google Earth photos of the site for the past 7 years that show a massive accumulation of organic material that is creating a serious liability for the city. Equally concerning was the fact that during our RFP process, the city's administration either denied Cocoa access to any DEQ violation notifications or outright denied that any violations had occurred. Through our FOIA request, we received confirmation from the DEQ that the site had 2 separate violations this year, one of which was the excessive accumulation of organic materials rule, and was told by the DEQ to remove 23,000 cubic yards of material by last Friday, or it could be in jeopardy of losing its DEQ composting registration. I am submitting photos as well as the DEQ notifications for your consideration because it will soon be up to the City Council to approve WeCare's 5 to 15-year extension renewal contract. From similar projects I have worked on, due to the contamination and the amount of unground woody material, the accumulated organic material represents a potentially $1 million liability because it's not saleable in its present form, and the current operator has failed in its efforts to successfully produce and market all of the compost as required by the city's contract. So to remain in compliance, the only reliable option will be to take this material to the landfill. The May 2017 city organic plan of taking an additional 20,000 tons of food waste at this site is ludicrous, given the existing equipment, infrastructure levels, current staffing levels, and the previous history of composting simply yard waste. I don't believe this is what the city of Ann Arbor or its residents wanted when they voted for building the compost site. Global warming and toxic algae blooms are not products of fake news. We have one of the best solutions to both within our reach. It's composting. At Cocoa, we work with municipalities and some of the largest food corporations in America. We produce high-quality humus compost that Michigan farmers are using to produce record corn and soybean yields while rejuvenating their soil at the same time. Healthy soil sequesters carbon and leaches less nutrients into the watersheds, and that means reducing the stress on the Great Lakes. In my opinion, the city should not approve the WeCare renewal contract on RFP 1725, Compost Facility Operations and Management. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker today is Charles Ream.
Thank you very much for allowing me to speak with you. My name is Chuck Ream, and I fight for cannabis. I also fight for all the people who benefit from the love and healing of God as it is transferred to them through the cannabis plant. I was active in the Human Rights Party in 1972. when Ann Arbor became the first city on earth to reject reefer madness with a $5 fine. In 2004, I passed medical marijuana in Ann Arbor with 3 out of 4 voters in favor. In 2011, I got the zoning and licensing ordinances through Council. Ann Arbor voters totally support cannabis. A lot of them moved here because of that safety. I was a kindergarten teacher for 33 years, elected 5 times in Scioto Township to the board. I'm a licensed professional counselor and executive director of the Safer Michigan Coalition, which has created 24 local victories for cannabis in Michigan cities over the last dozen years. And if anyone's really interested in cannabis policy, I will put you on the listserv and you'll know everything that happens in Michigan. Now we've got a problem, and it's a large problem. I'm certain that the Ann Arbor City Council will not allow anybody to disturb Ann Arbor patients or businesses. The new Michigan Medical Marijuana Licensing Board, which knows nothing whatsoever about marijuana, may decide to close all dispensaries in Michigan or to not allow licenses for those who stay open after December 15th. Employees would be laid off, businesses would close, patients would be desperate. Clear data shows that opiate overdose death declines by at least 1/4 where dispensaries are available, so such a closure would kill people. My ask today is simple and serious and supported by voters. Patients now come here from great distances to get what they need, and no caregiver can supply what a dispensary can supply. We need the mayor to send a very short, clear letter to Lara and to the licensing board stating that Ann Arbor will not close its dispensaries because they're serving a valuable function, and we have had a dispensary licensing process in place since 2010, which we are confident is working okay. This is a very tiny ask. It won't cost a penny. We need your support now. Please be as brave as our voters are. They always show moral leadership. Now you just need to say that you're supporting Yousef's bill. The great Yousef Rabi has put a bill in the legislature now. Simply please say that you support that bill. And my doctor this morning said, yes, it is, quote, medically dangerous, unquote, to cut off people's medicine cold turkey for no reason. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker today is Gordon Smith. Mr. Smith. Our next speaker today is Kai Patanen.
Dear Mayor, City Council, Jim Kostiva, Eli Cooper, and the FRA. I'm just Kai, and I live near the proposed train station. I'm in favor of the development with conditions. I have a few thoughts to share with you. The University of Michigan and the federal government should pay for the train station. If the federal government does not have the money, then the U of M should pay for all of it, as it is painfully obvious that they want it there. Along with the payment, the U of M should provide a $5 million payment toward the parks in the city of Ann Arbor and towards the cleanup of the 1,4-dioxane plume. This $5 million gift would be a symbolic gift, as the city was polluted by the 1,4-dioxane plume, while the university received a $5 million donation from the Gelmans. As the U of M takes a park from the public, then the $5 million gift would serve as an illustration of the U of M's renewed commitment to the environment and our parks. The city should also receive an annual payment for the lot as well, and this annual payment should be adjusted when the U of M parking rates are adjusted. I believe that many of you on City Council were against the lack of transparency in this process. Some of you were publicly against it, and I believe that many of you were against it privately. For those of you who took the heat for others in this lack of transparency, I hope that it provides political rewards and political capital for you in the future. The city has taken great painful steps in this process, and I hope those favors are returned to you as well. I also presume that affordable housing advocates and those that deal with the homeless will be fine with this development, as it permanently removes those who lived under the bridge and along the train tracks. This park was not used appropriately, as folks were living in the area and parkland was not being used for parkland. I was previously against this development due to the U of M's failure to solve an oil acid spill in the river near this area. I felt that if the university wouldn't show leadership towards solving a pollution spill, and it was willing to take $5 million from an environmental polluter, and it was willing to convert a park into a parking lot, then it lacked the environmental leadership to have a train station there. But there was a change in leadership at U of M, the president, hospital president, and the leader of U of M DPSS. And both the city and U of M began taking environmental matters seriously. If there was anything good that came out of the unsolved spill long ago, then it was a remarkable increase in public disclosure of spills. The new project will benefit the hospital, which in turn will benefit the city. I'm a skeptic who turned in favor of it. I believe that citizens in Ann Arbor will vote in favor of it, provided that the university federal government pays for the station, The city makes money each year from the parking, and the university contributes a gift of $5 million to the city park's dioxin cleanup. Eminent domain should not be used as it speaks against the public process, and this development must go to a vote as previously promised to the public. These are my thoughts alone as a person who lives near it. These are my thoughts alone on a political matter, and I'm just Kai.
Thank you. Our next speaker today is Shandani Wiersba.
Hi, I'm Chandani Wiersba. I'm a senior at the University of Michigan studying public policy. I'm here today because I'm interning at Civ City. If you don't know about it, it's a local, nonpartisan, nonprofit that focuses on increasing awareness of how local government works and getting residents in Ann Arbor specifically engaged in civic life. Through Civ City, I'm working on a research paper which looks at levels of diversity in local government and elected bodies. I will be sending a survey to all of the city council members after the November election, so you'll receive an email then, and also the Washtenaw County Board of Commissioners, the Ann Arbor District Library Board, and the Ann Arbor Board of Education. In this survey, you will be asked about your age range, socioeconomic status, gender, race, education status, as well as how you feel about the level of diversity in each identity within your board or council. If you're uncomfortable taking the survey online, I would appreciate if you let me know through email, and I'll be happy to meet you in person or help you with the survey over the phone. The end product is that I write a written report by the end of 2017, and in that I'll be comparing local and national levels of diversity in elected bodies. I'm hoping that this will encourage public discussion of the importance of diversity in representative government and give more awareness to the current state of diversity, or rather lack of diversity, in Ann Arbor government. Thank you so much for your time and cooperation.
Thank you. Are there communications today from council? Councilmember Eaton.
Thank you. I was happy to hear the city administrator communicate to us that the DDA is taking seriously the suicide prevention measures that we've asked them to take. I was disappointed earlier this week to find out that the DDA, when they requested bids for that work previously, didn't use their usual bid process, but rather delegated that task to their consultant. So there's no record of what the RFP said, what they requested, or what kind of distribution was made for that. I'm sad to report that this afternoon another death occurred as a result of somebody falling or jumping off from one of our parking structures. It happened about 4 p.m. It's reported on MLive. It just emphasizes how important it is that this move forward. But while we try to hurry this forward, we really need to have a good public process so that people can see what it is that the DDA is requesting and how they're pursuing it. Thank you.
Further, Councilmember Kalasapti.
Yeah. In the last 2 council meetings, we have been talking about self-driving cars, automation process, and our crosswalk ordinance. And last week, I was on Plymouth Road in the Kroger Mall area, and I saw these vehicles that said Domino's on it, and it said self-driving cars. Of course, I get very excited. I go near them, and there are all these engineers in like uniforms with Ford written on it, and they had clipboards, and so I didn't introduce myself. I said, can I ask you guys some questions? And they said, yeah, sure. And there were 4 or 5 of them. And I started asking them about, do you know about the Ann Arbor's unique crosswalk ordinance? And this Domino's is on Plymouth Road, and you can see an RRFB. And while I'm asking this question, the RRFB is going off, and they point to that and said, yeah, we love it because our cars can sense the RRFB, so we are all set with our crosswalk ordinance, Ann Arbor's crosswalk ordinance. I said, it's not just the RRFBs. If somebody is waiting at a crosswalk, they haven't actually put their foot in the crosswalk, you're supposed to stop. Otherwise, you get ticketed for it. Do you know there's a $140 ticket? And they did not know about it. And they kind of looked at each other, and one of them laughed and said, I guess Ford is going to pick it up because we'll be testing it on Plymouth Road. And so just wanted to let you know, this is firsthand. I spoke to them. So there is a real issue because we have a set of rules in our books, but all the cars that are being tested can sense the signal or sense somebody within the crosswalks, but waiting at the crosswalks. At least right now, they don't have the technology and they will not be. So just wanted to put that out. Thank you. Can we take
Further communication from council. Councilmember Warpahowski.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. Yes, this has been a heavy day for a lot of us in the community, not just the faller jumping from the parking structure. The incidents in Las Vegas as well are weighing on all of us. Across the nation, many people are responding to the incidents in Las Vegas by coming to blood donation centers and giving blood if they're able. The normal playful teasing tone I've been discussing the city and county blood challenge, it does not seem appropriate for tonight. But the county is hosting a blood drive on October 20th. I encourage all council members and all community members to participate, whether that day or another day as you're able. It's one way we can take part in trying to save lives. Right now, the Red Cross Give Blood website is experiencing slowdowns because of the large demand for people trying to sign up to give blood, but I'd please encourage you to sign up, whether it's for the October 20th Washtenaw County blood drive or another time. And for members of council, I'll be sending out a link as soon as the website lets me in. In heavy times like these, it's important to find things that give us life. And so I want to reiterate my invitation to council and the members of the public to attend the Skate Against Hate event at the skate park this upcoming Sunday from 2 to 6 p.m. The Ann Arbor Parks and Rec Department has been fantastic in helping pull this together. We've got DJs lined up, we've got an education stage, we've got the first African-American skateboarder to get significant corporate sponsorship as a pro skateboarder is going to come in. He also is a hip-hop performer, so he's going to be performing as well. We've got skate demonstrations, food trucks. It's going to be incredible. And on these days that we mourn the loss of life, both locally and nationally, finding opportunities like this to celebrate life are also important. The final thing I want to put before council and the community is I've had some communications with some members of the community following an incident that took place at the Blake Transit Center last week. The specific incident is, I'm not going to get into at this context, but the conversations have indicated that some teens of color and young people of color are not feeling welcomed in our downtown environment. I know that this sentiment is not something that any of us on council want to be experienced in our downtown. And so I am looking for a way that we can engage the relevant stakeholders, council members, the Ann Arbor Transit Authority, the AAATA, the Neutral Zone, potentially the school boards, potentially the Dispute Resolution Center. I'm still not sure the right way to have this conversation, but based on the communications I've been receiving the last week, it's an important one that we have. Not looking back at incidents in the past, but how do we move forward to make sure that our downtown and our civic spaces are welcoming to all. So if any of you have interest in that process, or if you have ideas for how we could move forward properly with that, I welcome that. I don't know how to do it, but I know that this setting with 3 minutes at the podium and us passively listening is not the right way to do it. So I think we need a different mechanism. So I welcome your wisdom and input on that process. Thank you.
Further communication from council. Councilmember Westfall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For those who have an interest in advocating for gun policy reform, I wanted to let everybody know that the Washtenaw chapter for Moms Demand Action for Gun Safety, for Gun Sense, meets the fourth Tuesday of each month. They welcome all. You don't have to be a mom. And they'll also have a table at the Skate Against Hate event. Also, I wanted to particularly thank all the speakers tonight, but especially the last speaker who was advocating for civic involvement. Viewers at home may not be able to see this poster, but there's a poster on our dais here. It says the last day to register to vote is October 10th, so that's for the general election. I just wanted to alert everybody to that, and hopefully people can advocate for people taking action locally. Thanks.
Councilmember Lum.
Thanks. I'd just like to follow on to Councilmember Kalasapathi's observations and exchange with the Domino's folks out on Plymouth Road. It sounds to me, just based on that, interesting and bit of an eye-opening exchange. It sounds like it would be important to follow up with Domino's and the other companies that are out there that are now testing these autonomous vehicles on our streets, if they're not responding, if they're not operating in a manner that it respects takes into account our crosswalk ordinance. I'm not an engineer, obviously I don't know how this stuff works, but that's a bit of an eye-opener. And because obviously we have pedestrians and other bicyclists, other folks who are operating within that universe. And it sounds like these vehicles apparently are not. So, Mr. Lazarus, anything, you can do to follow up with those folks and circle back on that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Further communication from council. Councilmember Grand.
Thank you. Just want to congratulate Ward 3's Allen Elementary on being named a Blue Ribbon school. It's quite an achievement, especially considering some of the difficulties they had with the physical plant of that building. So, so congratulations to them. It has been a horrible day. I hope that some of us in the community can continue to do something positive, and wish my colleagues and those in the audience who I know are probably feeling like I'm feeling some perspective and kindness this evening.
Further communication from council. I have some communications with respect to nominations and appointments. I'd like to recommend the following nominations for your consideration: to the Energy Commission, Charlotte Jameson; to the Historic District Commission, Jessica Quignano Filling; and to the, those will be for consideration at our next meeting. With respect to consideration at this meeting, I would ask that we have consider and approve the reappointment of Brian Wienert to the Local Officers Compensation Committee in a one-step process so as to facilitate a meeting. That said, with respect to Mr. Wienert's nomination, may I have a motion, please? Moved by,
So move.
thank you. Moved by Councilmember Eaton, seconded by Councilmember Westfall. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? With 11 council members present, all voting in the affirmative, Mr. Weinert's reappointment is approved. With respect to a couple of items that were have already been touched upon ably here, one brief point with respect to the crosswalk ordinance. I think it's important that when we discuss the crosswalk ordinance, that we do so with precision, because the language, as I bumble the word, because the language of the ordinance was carefully drafted. It does not require a driver to determine whether a person is waiting at a crosswalk. It merely requires the driver to determine whether the person is stopped at a crosswalk. There's no necessity for the driver to determine the intention of the pedestrian. The pedestrian merely needs to be stopped at the curbside, and then their right to enter the crosswalk, the obligation on the part of the driver to yield, is thereby triggered. Finally, the 2 points that have been raised with respect, one with respect to the horrific shooting in Las Vegas. It's of course something that weighs upon the nation and weighs upon the community in so many different ways. We feel it here. We feel it. I know that many of us with school-age children have been discussing it, and that's something that weighs upon them. It increases a level of uncertainty in our community, and that's a tragedy, and it's undeserved, and it's frankly, if this occurs in our country, I believe is a national disgrace. It's something that that other nations are able to deal with, other nations are able to deal with it as a matter of culture and a matter of legislation, and I believe we ought to be able to do so as well. Finally, with respect to the death today at one of our parking structures, that too is a tragedy, a local one. The gentleman is unknown to me. If it is in accord with previous practice, with previous tragic experiences, it's a tragedy of mental illness. It's a tragedy of community health, and it's something that we need to focus on. We need to make sure that people who cry out for help receive it. People who don't know that they need help, that we take care of each other, that we look to encourage each other to obtain help when we believe our friends and colleagues and family members need it. I'm glad that the folks at the DDA are taking the accelerated action to re-up the old bid, even at great expense, in order to make sure that this change to our parking structures is done effectively and swiftly. And that are my communications. With respect to the consent agenda, may I have a motion, please, to approve the consent agenda? Moved by Councilmember Crapel, seconded by Councilmember Smith. Discussion, please, of the consent agenda. Councilmember Eaton.
I'd like to pull CA 8 and CA 9.
CA 8 and CA 9. They will go to DS1, DS2. Further discussion? Councilmember Lum.
CA 12, no need to pull it out from the consent agenda. I just briefly wanted to touch on this item. It's a construction contract for the watershed driver training wall project. The existing wall on the west side of Watershed between Narrow Gauge Way and Watershed Court is really deteriorated and is being replaced. And I just wanted to thank staff for working with the adjacent neighbors on the replacement plan, and to let folks know, assuming this is approved tonight, that it's expected that construction will begin in late October and be completed by the end of the year. So thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion of the consent agenda? Councilmember Grant.
No need to pull anything. I just wanted to express my pleasure at CA10. I think this is a terrific project for the ward, for the city, at the Bryant Community Center, that will really enable the Community Action Network to do what they do best, and comes as a result of support not only from the city, but from the county as well. So thank you for their contributions to making this happen.
Further discussion? Councilmember Warpahowski.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. As long as we're talking about things but not pulling them, regarding CA 13, approving purchase of patching material for potholes. Several ward members have asked me to pass along the concern that when we patch a pothole, but the patching material isn't tamped down, it creates an uneven surface in the bike lane, and sometimes a unpleasant situation for the subsequent drivers who get the asphalt kicking up against their car. So obviously, we want the potholes patched. Winter is coming, but if we can look, and sometimes we get the times when winter is just so fast and furious upon us that we can't keep up with the potholes. But as conditions allow, if we can look at tamping those down for a smoother road surface and for the subsequent drivers, my constituents would appreciate it.
Further discussion of the consent agenda? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The consent agenda, less CA 8 and CA 9, is approved with 11 council members present, all vote in the affirmative, thus satisfying the 8-vote requirement with respect to CA 1, CA 2, CA 3, and CA 12. We now have a public hearing. Public hearings are opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters of specific interest on the agenda. To speak at a public hearing, one speech must relate specifically to the matter on the agenda. Speakers do not need to have signed up in advance. Speakers have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time clock. As a matter of courtesy, we may have only one person speaking at a time. And finally, if you require assistance in speaking before council, we'd be delighted to provide it to you. Public hearing number 1, resolution to approve the McCowan lots 27 and 28 and 30, annexation 2633, 2647, and 2651 Dexter Road. Is there anyone who would like to speak at this public hearing? Seeing no one, this public hearing is closed. We now have before us the work session minutes of September 11 and the regular session meeting minutes of September 18, 2017. May I have a motion, please, to approve these minutes? Moved by Councilmember Smith, seconded by Councilmember Crapel. Discussion of the minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? They are approved. C1, an ordinance to amend Chapter 55, zoning of 6.4 acres from PUD planned unit development to C1AR, campus business residential district, with conditions. 1140 Broadway rezoning. Moved by Councilmember Ackerman, seconded by Councilmember Westfall. Discussion of C1, Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The petition before us is looking for a rezoning of 6.4 acres at a site known as Lower Town at 1140 Broadway from the current planned urban development to C1AR. This site is at the corner of Maiden Lane and Broadway and proximate to the U of M Kellogg Eye Center, residential apartment complexes, single-story commercial strip malls, and the Broadway neighborhood, which is a recognized and protected historic district here on Ann Arbor's north side. The rezoning is also accompanied by a site plan and a brownfield plan, each of which will be brought back to us with the rezoning on November 9th, should this move forward tonight at first reading. The brownfield is a combination of both environmental and non-environmental tax dollars, and the majority of which is in response to a toxic plume below the site, which is slowly migrating towards the Huron River. A quick summary of the site plan, although it is not the item before us, but I think should be taken into the context. The plan is for 3 buildings of housing, just over 600 dwelling units, within 2 buildings of rental housing and 1 building of condos, along with retail in Building C. The buildings are to be built in 3 phases, with Building A to the north containing most of the 573 parking spaces and an interior parking structure. The height of each building varies. However, the northernmost arms, as we heard during public comment, have now a maximum of 4 stories, while the interior of the site towards Maiden Lane has a maximum height of 8 stories. The requested FAR is 291%, which is below the maximum for C1AR, and also below much of the development that we've seen downtown since the A2D2 rezoning that took place in our downtown in 2009 and 2010. Through the advocacy of the public and the Planning Commission, and through some sacrifice of the developer and some creative thinking on the parties, on that party, the last major change to the site plan occurred during postponement, in which the petitioner brought the northern arms of Building A in by 17 feet and down to 4 stories. This change allowed for a path that could be constructed along Traver Creek as a public amenity with easement for public access, not just to serve the residents of this potential new development. Bringing it down to 4 stories brings it closer to being in line with our master plan, which calls for a maximum height of 8 stories within the site, and a maximum height of 4 stories adjacent to the historic neighborhood to the north. It's important to note that this aspect of our master plan, which calls for a mixed-use village, is written specifically for the PUD that exists today, a PUD that was not able to move forward because of financing issues, especially in the wake of the recession. It's an incredibly complicated site, one that has floodplain, one that has severe contamination, and one that is limited in size. As it sits now, it is a fenced-off vacant lot. I will leave it there since we're not going into the brownfield or the site plan. Conditions put on this rezoning limit height to 100 feet and limit it further within a zone adjacent to the creek and neighborhood to the north.
Further discussion? Councilmember Eaton.
I'm going to vote against this zoning change. First, we need to realize that the question of the appropriate zoning for this property doesn't impact either the question of the appropriateness of a brownfield plan or what might be built here eventually. I believe that the CA1R zoning district is particularly inappropriate for this site because the site is neither near campus nor near the central business district, which is really the description of this zoning type. I would think that the same kind of building or a similar kind of building could be accomplished through a PUD because once zoning is approved for a property, if a project doesn't go forward, that zoning stays with the property, and we have less control over what the next developer may in fact build there. So if we approved a PUD, it would be much more exacting in what we expect to be built there than this zoning with a couple of conditions affixed to it. I would also note that the conditions that are being attached to this zoning district are not very demanding. We're really not getting much for as much as we're giving up. So I won't support it tonight, and I won't support it when it comes back.
Further discussion? Councilmember Kalasapathy.
Yeah. I have many concerns, but I think I would really like to talk about two issues because one is regarding parking, which I was at a community meeting even a few days ago. I'm talking about Kellogg Street, which is right off Pontiac Trail, not the Kellogg Eye Center, but there's a Kellogg Street right off Pontiac Trail, and there is a condominium complex with 64 units, and about 25 of the owners turned up for a meeting. They had some serious parking issues. So that condominium was built with one parking per unit. So there are 64 ground level parking units in that condominium. And the issue is, because of the development of Argo, residential parking has been instituted. So they do not have enough on-street parking. And what came out of the discussion is, I think, very important. Even if you have your work or your commercial area near your home and you might use your bicycle or take a bus, the issue is many people do own 2 cars. Most of them own at least one, some of them own 2. So my concern with the Broadway issue is we are not even having 1 unit. It's 0.9. So I do understand conceptually, like if you're working 5 blocks from your home, yeah, you're going to walk to work. That's not the issue here. But parking is becoming a real issue. I worked with the neighborhoods on Traver, and they wanted residential parking, and I hear that their situation is resolved, and the same thing has happened. So, I mean, neighborhood by neighborhood, they are putting parking, residential parking limits because, let's say, people who work at Kellogg Eye Center used to park at Traver and walk over because it's free parking. So it's a real, and we really need to address this, ownership versus use. A lot of people, yeah, they might use their bikes, but they own the car. Where are they going to park it? And also, the second issue that I really have is this whole concept of mixed-use village. We are using, in the master plan, we have this ideal of a mixed-use village. It's going to be commercial, retail, and housing. And I think it's not sincere when we use the word mixed-use village And when the commercial retail space, I think I have heard 1% and 3%. I mean, it's 1%. 1%. I wouldn't use the word. I mean, it's like buying a bag of mixed vegetables and you have 1% of peas and like carrots. I'll be like, really? So it's like mixed vegetables. So anyway, I find it very kind of not sincere about it. We shouldn't be using that. I mean, if it's 1%, it's almost like a rounding error. And so again, this is going to compound the issue of congestion, traffic, parking, because when you're not bringing grocery stores or whatever in, and it's just going to be housing, people have to get out they would have to probably go to Kroger to get their groceries. So this traffic issue is not, so we might be saying this mixed use, people are going to find grocery there. No, there's not going to be a grocery store there. So I find this really problematic to be saying that it's mixed use and putting in a block of residential unit, because this is not going to alleviate your congestion issue at all. And almost every week I meet with neighborhood groups, it's parking. Now, it used to be, 2 years ago, I used to always complain about roads, right? That was every group called me and complained and yelled at me about the situation of the roads. Now I think it's a little better because they don't yell at me for the condition of the roads. But parking is #1 issue, #1. So I just wanted to put that out, and I do not plan to vote for this and many other reasons. Thank you.
Councilmember Grand.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a couple questions for staff about the conditional zoning. Thank you. I'm just going with the shorter question first, since I was going to flip it, but since we've been talking about parking. So my understanding is that there will be ride share opportunities within Maven, Zipcar, something.
Yeah, the petitioner is looking at a variety of options, and as part of the, excuse me, as part of the petition to consider to seek a variance for parking on the site, they also identified some of the attributes that are make this site well suited for that variance or that ratio of 0.9 spaces per residential unit. The proximity to job centers, the proximity to high frequency transit, the commitment to non-motorized amenities in the spaces as well. I guess to that end, obviously veering off the zoning aspect, but lots of aspects to the site lend itself potentially to a lower parking load, and the Zoning Board of Appeals did agree with that by approving a variance for 0.9. I want to be clear, no variance was sought for the commercial spaces. Those are being provided 100%.
Okay, thank you. Can you speak a little bit to the affordable housing piece of the conditional zoning? How it's going to be operationalized, what some of the thoughts. I know they were thinking of possibly more units at a higher, AMI, but now are came to that 60%.
Sure. Some of the early discussions we had with the petitioner were they'd always started with a commitment to affordable units in the proposed development. That was considered in a variety of mechanisms. One would provide higher units that might be targeted to higher income households. It would be roughly 60 to 100% AMI targeting. Because of your previous adopted goal as council to provide a specific target of units by 2020 that meet the 60% AMI unit, we thought it was more appropriate to sort of consolidate those units into 60% AMI or lower, and accordingly that resulted in fewer units based on a similar kind of financial impact to the project.
Do we have any idea about unit size? In those units, are we going to see one size unit, variety of units?
At this point, I think we're talking about a variety of units in a similar pattern to the overall scale of units throughout the development. Don't have a specific listing, but there's not an intention for all of them to be one size. I think they're really intended to follow the pattern of frequency of unit size throughout the development. I will point out that this proposed petition includes a lot of one-bedroom efficiencies units, so the relative range is going to be within the smaller size anyhow.
Okay, that's fair. I'm just hoping we can maybe push to get a little diversity operationalized in that agreement, if at all possible. Be great, thank you. And I just did have a couple comments not related to staff. One, the idea that this is not near campus, as someone who has a couple degrees from a building that's on the medical campus, is a little perplexing to me. The housing around there completely serves, along Main Lane, completely serves those who work or go to school on the medical campus. So the idea that this is not near campus when directly across the street is a university building doesn't really sit well with me. I completely understand the idea that we want to, speak to the adjacent residential neighborhoods and feel that, residential parking has worked quite well in some other neighborhoods, and I'm sure there are other tools that we can think of as well. But to me, this idea of at least, going forward on a first reading to have a campus district does make sense. Do I wish there was more mixed use in this use? Absolutely. But for first reading, I'm definitely comfortable moving forward.
Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, just to put a finer note on the proximity to campus and the appropriateness of a zoning district like this. I mean, we're talking about it being a half mile away from U of M's medical school. It's a mile away from North Quad. It's a half mile away from the nursing school. And it's feet away from the furthest extent of U of M's property. And then as well, speaking to the central business district, which in our case is most appropriately the DDA district, it's just about within half of a mile from Carytown. The only zoning of C1AR that exists in the city to date is at South State Street in Packard, which puts it within the same distance range from the Law Quadrangle or the furthest southern extent of the DDA district. This is not out of scope of C1AR and its application previously. With regards to the parking, Ann Arbor is 70% fossil fuel dependent, and a large chunk of that is caused by transportation. And single-user automobiles are probably one of the greatest contributors to fossil fuels that exists in this country, and particularly that can be regulated or curbed in any way by a municipal government. If we want to be contributing to efficiencies in energy use and to decreasing carbon footprint of our 29 square miles and our 120,000 residents, it has to be in a way that limits the use of the single-user automobile. And a great way to do that is to not provide 2 parking spaces for every single resident who wants to. There are ways that we can curb behavior. We have ordinances around abandoned vehicles so that individuals can't have 2 cars and leave one on the side of the road. There are regulations in which we can curb the behavior of people not acting neighborly, but that isn't to say that encouraging or facilitating people having multiple cars is what we need to be doing. I'd also say letting people live closer to where they work decreases the need for parking. Our largest employer is, again, only half of a mile away from this location in the U of M Medical Center, and if you count U of M as a whole, Central Campus is only 1 mile away. Our downtown district that employs 25% of all private sector workers in the city of Ann Arbor is only half a mile away. If we want people to be driving less than for those 2 times a day, 5 days a week, when everyone is rushing for an hour, we need to be encouraging people to take the bus, of which there are 2 different bus lines that service this area, both the AAATA and the U of M bus. And AAATA, I think, has something like 6 to 8 different lines that come into contact with this site. This is a location that makes sense for denser housing. It's needed, the demand is there, employers are there, transit is there. The only thing that isn't there is literally any building. So with respect to its proximity to campus, its proximity to the central business district, I believe it to be appropriate. We can have a deeper dive into the matters such as the environmental cleanup and what an appropriate share of tax dollars is to make sure that, you know, our natural waterways are safe and clean. We can have a larger conversation about, do we truly want to curb our impact on our carbon footprint by limiting parking? Do we want to make this more affordable at the market rate by saying the developer doesn't have to build incredibly expensive parking structures for a mode of technology that may not even be relevant in 20 years, as some people love to so adamantly talk about with respect to autonomous vehicles. So for all those reasons, I believe it to be appropriate. I do have some questions around process. I want to make it really clear that it is not appropriate for this body to suggest conditions, and that is not my intention, but I would love to ask the petitioner, I guess, how were these conditions agreed upon, and why are these the ones voluntarily being asked for?
We have to, we're good to go with this. Don't we need to just like form, yeah. I mean, not that I have any objection at all.
I mean, there's typically no vote, but just if there's an issue.
But don't you just need to ask that? No? Okay, I thought you did.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm Ron Mucha with Morningside Group, principal of Morningside Group. In answer to your question, from the onset, thanks, Alexis. I usually do that for from the onset, we had talked about the proposing the zoning to be C1AR, and one of the issues with C1AR is it just doesn't have a height limitation. And so we spoke with a large cross-section of people throughout the community, and one of the concerns that we repeatedly would hear is, well, there's no height limitation, and what if the project, for whatever reason, doesn't move forward? And it struck us as a completely sensible concern that that's right. We were talking about a mid-rise scale project, and there's really no need to allow, you know, unlimited height going forward. So it was really just a wide cross-section of people, everyone from neighbors and all stakeholders and so forth, that really thought it would be a good idea, and so we volunteered it, and it seems to be very well received. I would say that the language you see in the conditional zoning, the way it's written right now, has evolved thanks to staff's help, Alexis in particular, to make it more clear. I think what we wrote in the beginning, the intention's the same, but it was a little bit ambiguous, and so we refined it, the language, and we attached an exhibits to make it crystal clear the areas of the site where different heights are allowed.
Thank you. Were there any other conditions discussed?
No, that's the only condition.
Thank you.
Councilor Ackerman, you still have the floor.
I'm comfortable for now.
Councilmember Smith.
Following up on some of the ideas that my colleague, Councilman Ackerman, brought up, I would point out that as we talk about density being an important part of how we reduce and mitigate our carbon impact, I think it's extremely important to think that, you know, we can plan our city for more cars, certainly, and require 2 spaces and let people store their cars and make space for that. But I don't think that that's what the folks in Ann Arbor have said is their intention, is that, you know, we have some values that are adopted and enshrined in our master plan and in terms of our climate action plan and our sustainability framework that this project meets. And I think we have to accept moving forward that sometimes paradigms change, and that no longer do we need to require 2 parking spaces per unit and take up that space. As I said, we can plan our city for cars, or we can plan it for people. And when I think about an urban village, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a 10,000 square foot Kroger for me, on the end of my block. I was following up to what somebody said earlier, that, within 3,000 feet, there are 2 grocery stores, in Sparrow Market and the Co-op. That's, 15-minute walk. It's 5.5 blocks by any stretch of the imagination. That, to me, is being part of the fabric of an urban village. And then lastly, when you think about, the 600 or so odd units that are proposed here, think about the percentage of those units that are people that would otherwise be coming from outside of our community to go to school and to work at the hospital and to work downtown. We have about 80,000 people that commute in here every day. And if half of those people in this building are people that would otherwise be commuting, that's a significant impact on traffic reduction. And when we talk about land use decisions and trying to reduce our dependency on single occupant vehicle trips, which is, if not our biggest, one of our top 3 contributors to our carbon footprint, we have to make decisions like this. This is the right decision to make. I think this is a good proposal for all the reasons that my colleagues have talked about, and I'm happy to support it this evening.
I've lived within a few blocks of this site for over 15 years. I've thought about this location a lot since my local shopping grocery store was removed from my neighborhood. It just as a little bit of background. Also, the site is exceptionally complicated. There's a 9.5-story eye center with an industrial systems on top of it within a stone's throw. There's residential areas, significant amount of residential areas. There's rental townhomes. There's parking structures, and who knows what else will be on the adjacent university property in the coming years. As a transitional zone, this location can do no right. It is a beautiful vista when you come across the Broadway Bridge. It's a beautiful vista for those of us in my neighborhood when you're walking along Traver. As I talk to my constituents about this rezoning, it occurred to me that what's in the master plan for this location, we do not have a zoning for. The master plan was made for a PUD, and the PUD has expired. I think that many of us on council, and certainly a lot of people who advise me, are leery of PUD because of some problems that happened in recent decades, for good reason. And C1AR is the alternative that meets that master plan goal. And so it's close to what we want there. A little bit on the pros and cons. For me, the biggest 2 pros are the environmental remediation. Those maybe not everybody knows that the contamination from the old cleaners that was there has already left the site and is underneath the neighboring properties, underneath other people's homes, and will at some point very soon, if it has not already, entered the Huron River. And that is exceptionally concerning for me. The other large pro that hasn't been mentioned or isn't been mentioned as much as I want it to be is we have a dearth of housing in town based on supply and demand, and that is drastically driving up prices of housing in our community to the detriment of many, many of our residents. And I do not like those things. And on the other side, my constituents, the ones who are most impacted by this location, are nearly singularly against it. And that brings me a great deal of cause. The massing near very much single residential family neighborhood without a significant buffer, if you will, building size buffer. The 4-story reduction was a nice statement, but I know my constituents would love to see that more significantly moved. I'm not advocating towards the petitioner at all. I know that is inappropriate. Yeah, I question whether or not the amount of mixed use in this location is really mixed use. And that's distinctly concerning for me because I think walkability, as is mentioned, is really critical. And then I'm also drastically concerned for the nearby neighbors for the amount of parking pressure that they're going to be potentially put on, which they've already gone through a whole iteration a few years back around, and our street crews and trash pickup people can barely access Broadway Street right now, as it is based on the parking pressure that's in that location already. So those are my thoughts.
Councilmember Westfall.
Thank you. I'm happy to pass this on to second reading. For me, we have a site here that's been a blight on this neighborhood for years, with a toxic plume heading to the Huron River. We have a property owner who has untangled, the ownership mess that this was in, and wants to provide a substantial amount of housing almost immediately adjacent to the county's largest employer. As has been said before, this chips away at our really unfortunate jobs housing balance. The folks who would be living in this project would normally be clogging up Plymouth Road and Fuller Road, commuting in for work. And instead, many will likely be just walking 10 minutes to their job. As also has been said, this is a legacy failed PUD. I'm glad the old PUD didn't get built in the end because I think the impact that would have had on the surrounding neighborhood would have been much greater with office uses and such. It creates much more of a traffic condition than residential. I'm troubled by the notion as well that we should expect every development to accommodate automobiles. This comes from, I think, rises from the notion that folks are either interested in having a car or have the means to have multiple cars. And that's not the kind of housing that we're short of in the city. I think our parking policies have led to way too much auto orientation, and that is not the direction that society is going in. It's not the direction that people coming into the community are going in. So I've been pleased that the owners have been reaching out to us and to the community. It's never something we take lightly when there's a large project proposed. It's awful, as we all know, to either be near or witness what happens when you live near a construction zone. I appreciate the difficulty that these bring to the neighbors. This, I think, is an appropriate accommodation in scale and in tapering toward the neighborhood. And I think the benefits will be very large to the community. Thanks.
Councilmember Lowe.
Thank you. I have mixed feelings about this proposal, but I will support the first reading of the zoning tonight so we can move forward to second reading and hear from the neighbors and the public. Obviously, this is a major project, major decision. We're talking about 6+ acres in a key area, 3 large buildings totaling over 800,000 square feet and 610 residential units. This is an area where I first lived 40 years ago. I moved to Ann Arbor. and used to be a vital, relatively vital commercial area, but as we know, it's a site that's been vacant now for years. And on the positive side of the ledger, the development certainly improves the site, and with the brownfield component, will clean up the contamination that exists there now. I do believe that having had this vacant site for so many years, that has had an adverse impact on the area, and that this development could be a positive catalyst for the area. And so I see that as a positive. The added housing stock I see as a positive, although with just 15 units, of the over 600 units being affordable housing, it's not a major factor in meeting that specific challenge. I do have some concerns. First is this sheer size and mass of the buildings, the conditions the developer is proposing to limit the height to 8 stories, certainly better than no conditions at all, but at 8 stories and 800,000 square feet, I am still concerned about the compatibility with the surrounding area, and I greatly appreciate that the neighbors obviously, invested a lot of time to create that 3D model. Those kinds of models are always, very helpful. And while the arms of that building were, lowered to 4 stories, still, it's the model illuminates, how this will, quote unquote, be compatible with the surrounding area. I would like to have seen more than 4,500 square feet dedicated to retail and commercial. That is less than 1% of the total square footage. So it is a bit of a stretch to call this a mixed-use project. It's essentially a residential project, and my sense is, from reading various comments from the meetings that have been held, is that the neighbors would have preferred more retail. And so I have mixed feelings. I also recognize the reality of the situation. The property's been vacant for a very long time. I think it does need to be redeveloped, and this is the proposal we have. I'm not a PUD naysayer myself. I was around here when we used to do PUDs all the time, and with PUDs, there's a lot of give and take with the development community and negotiations, and does the development community like PUDs for that very reason? I don't think they're, the honest answer is no. But there was always give and take, we talk about, parkland contributions and things, that, folks on one side of the ledger would say, you can't demand this, that, or the other, but things were negotiated. And, so you can accomplish positive things with PUDs. And in this case, I know that there's a 10% parking reduction, so you're getting a 61 parking space variance. And thank you for providing, in response to some questions I sent, the parking study analysis and the parking variance justification. I gotta say, when I look at that, though, so much of this is based on targets that we set. Targets for, in the DDA study, the targets for bicycle and transit mode sharing in 2019 are 8% for bicycles and 18.6 for transit mode sharing. What does the non-motorized transportation program tell us from 2014? And the way this is worded again, only 70% of the trips are passenger vehicles, and 30% are performed by other modes of transportation. So therefore, the conclusion is owning a personal vehicle in Ann Arbor is not always necessitated. It doesn't seem to be grounded in the reality of what, is in our universe right now. And, right, I understand we want to do a lot of behavior modification around car use, but it, we also need to reflect what the demands are. And I am concerned, as Councilmember Frenzel and Kalasapathy have noted, that there will be parking pressures on the neighborhood streets. And, nobody needs that. Because, if people don't have a place to park, they find, and already apparently that is the case on Broadway. So just some concerns that I'm hoping we can delve further into. So again, I'll be supporting this at first reading. And I do look forward to hearing much more at the public hearing when it comes back for final approval of the zoning and site plan.
Councilmember Warpahowski.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. I've got a couple of quick questions for staff. As staff comes up, just to give the developer a heads up, I'll be asking you for information on the cost per parking space in the structure, so if that's available, readily available. First question for staff. The staff memo indicates that the plume has spread beyond the property boundary, and Councilmember Frenzel described this as well. Is the demolition of the previous structures and the loss of impervious area likely exacerbating this rate of spread? Are we getting more infiltration pushing the plume faster, or are we worse now than if we still have the buildings up in terms of the rate of
Yeah, that is possible, and that same factor is being taken into account with the site design to minimize that condition going forward. So absolutely, as more water is forced through that property, it has the potential to exacerbate the movement of that contaminant in the groundwater.
Okay, thank you. And then the other piece that I'm trying to understand, I recognize we're getting beyond just the specific zoning, but as Councilmember Eaton rightly said, the zoning is going to be the big determining factor here, so understanding how these pieces fit together is important. The conditional zoning the proposed site plan proposes an easement for public access along the creek.
Correct.
But that is not an element within the conditional zoning.
Correct.
So help me understand how those pieces would come forward at site plan. Would we be receiving a resolution to accept the easement at the same time as site plan approval? Is that something that would come forward after financing?
It would be very similar to other site plans that have involved some sort of public easement. Oftentimes, that's going to be potentially referenced in a development agreement, and we would make sure or ensure that that has been executed prior to a milestone such as issuance of a certificate of occupancy.
Okay. Just to provide commentary on those two questions, I think that's it for my questions for staff. On the spreading of the potential impact that the water infiltration has and exacerbating the rate of transmission of the plume, to me this indicates that this isn't something to sit on forever. There is a sense of urgency in trying to get the source material that we can get cleaned up, the mitigation material elements put into place to prevent further movement of the plume beyond the property line and to reduce the amount of water infiltration above the source material to slow down the spread of what we can't get out. Regarding the easement for the pathway, I have, part of what I'm hearing my colleagues wrestle with at this point is for those who are okay with the drawings we've seen, there's that lingering fear, what happens if this doesn't get built, as the last project doesn't get built, and what can we do? And if this falls through, I think the massing elements of the conditional zoning go a long way to provide assurance that we won't have a building of unlimited height, an infinitely tall building on that site. But there's still that question of how do we make sure that this public amenity, which I think is very important, it was, when I've talked to the neighbors, that was a concern, and the ability to provide it as a benefit. And so as this moves forward, I'm going to be trying to figure out, is there a way to provide a little bit of more certainty there. For the developer, if you could speak a little bit to what the cost per unit of parking is, especially the structured parking.
So the cost of the parking is obviously the cost of talking about the hard cost of the deck.
Right.
But then you have to talk about the financing cost, soft costs such as design, if you want to allocate land costs to it. When you do all of that, and I don't have that exact number, I could bring that back to you or get that to staff to you if you'd like. But that number it has to be in the realm of $30,000 a space. But I could, if you'd like to know, I can get you a more exact answer.
If you find out that that's not within, that's orders of magnitude off one way or the other, I'd like to know that, but the sense of $30,000 a space is helpful.
Definitely not orders of magnitude off.
Okay, I'm good enough for that. I think it's important for us to remember this as we look at this issue of parking allocation. Councilmember Smith and others have talked about what that means for our traffic, our carbon use, but also as we've been talking about affordability, including market rate affordability, you start throwing in, saying, okay, it's not just $30,000 per unit for one space, but $60,000 for two spaces. If we're gonna have the same number of units on site, then we're looking at a parking deck that's twice as tall, if not more. And then the neighborhood concerns about scale and massing get blown out the window. So I think that the parking that's proposed for this site with the access to transit, with the mode share, is appropriate. I think especially because when you dive in deeper to the parking, to the mode share numbers, what you find is that the people who live within a mile of their workplace have extremely high walk and bike rates, extremely high. And it's the people who live 2 to 3 miles out, it's moderate. And we get beyond 3 miles, it drops off the cliff very quickly. So this proposed development, with its proximity to campus in particular, and the medical campus in particular, I think we're going to see, if it moves forward, a lot of the residents will be either students or workers within the University of Michigan Medical Complex, and that very short trip down Maiden Lane will have a very high non-motorized commuter rate, and thereby push down the need for a first or second car. So that site and that proximity to work is very important in terms of looking at what our existing mode share data are, and what that's going to mean for demand for vehicles on a site like this. I mentioned this question of getting the issues right and figuring out what assurances we can put forward. Councilmember Frenzel, I think, did a very good job laying out the pros and cons. The other concern that I've had in my conversations with some of the neighbors is the question of aesthetics, the question of building materials and color palette and things like that. I've got no eye for color, so I'm going to stay away from the color palette issue. But when we're looking at signature high visibility pieces like this, and this is a large proposed building on a high visibility corner across two major traffic routes, I think that's where the kind of design standards and material standards like we put into our D1 and D2 zoning may be appropriate. And I don't believe they're appropriate for all sites, back to that cost factor and how it pushes up the cost of building, which it's eventually the tenants or owners who face those increased costs. But that's the other piece that I'll support it at first reading, but it's a concern, and I think it's a concern that we may be able to find a way to address either through the development agreement or other means. The last thing I wanted to comment on as a broader policy issue is we've had some discussion of the mixed-use nature of this site and some concerns that there's not much of it there. There have been other cases where we've received requests from neighbors to have a mixed-use element within a building, but it has not been possible under our zoning. The one that comes to mind most recently is the Felch development over there between Kingsley and Felch, where there's what's currently a commercial building, but as that property gets incorporated into the full design and that site gets rezoned, the existing zoning won't allow commercial use on that what had been a commercial building. So if mixed use is as important as I hear most of us saying that it is, I think we should be looking for ways to provide a little bit more flexibility in our zoning code to say, maybe it's a conditional use that the planning commission can allow small scale retail in R4 construction, other types of zoning that's not currently allowed, so that we're not looking for this site to provide all the mixed use for the region, but we're able to put pockets of mixed use throughout our communities, just like the Fifth Ward, Jefferson Market is a much loved a pocket of mixed use that you couldn't do now with our current zoning. So that's not for this issue, but it's the kind of thing, if we're talking about mixed use, we have barriers in our existing code that prohibit neighborhood appropriate, properly scaled mixed use. Thank you.
Councilmember Crapol.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not, I think there's been a lot of good points. I'm not going to repeat all of them. I think I've struggled with this a little bit too, and some of it's been, I think, and Councilmember Warpahowski, I think, hit on a lot of it for me in terms of kind of our policy approach, because we don't have the appropriate zoning in place for what we said we want to do according to our master plan, and I think we need to look at that and think about it, because I think one of our shortfalls right now is we've talked about the mixed use, and in the near downtown area, we kind of have a scaled approach. We can go from D1 to D2, but do we need to have a discussion to talk about how do we do these mixed use so we minimize impact on existing neighborhood, or is there a way to do it? I'm not sure there is an answer, but I think we need to look at least having that discussion to try and resolve it, because there's just going to be more issues like this going forward, and we shouldn't be recreating the wheel every time we go about this, and developers coming in should understand what it is or isn't, and I think it would be better. Because I agree, the mixed use, it's kind of there and not, and it depends, I think, on how you read or how you want to interpret it, what it actually means. Because I agree with Councilman Warpahowski that folks I talk to, they want mixed use. They want to be able to have coffee shops and cafes and things in their neighborhood. And our zoning doesn't always allow that in all areas. And I think that's something people, especially as we talk density and people want to live in closer, they want to have those type of amenities close to them to be able to walk to and to be able to enjoy, to help improve their quality of life. I think we've had the discussion on vehicles, where that's going. I think change is coming. I see it in the neighborhood I live in. A number of the residents don't own vehicles. They use bikes, they use mass transit. And I think we're making that transition slowly, and none of us know how quickly it's going to come, but it is going to come, I think. But, if it's not within the next 10 years, the residents who are living there now are going to feel that pressure from increased parking and increased traffic. And I'm not sure how to resolve that for people. I think the transition is coming long term. I think I can support this at first reading, and I think I will, but there are other issues or questions I'm looking to have answered on my own account before we move forward. Thank you.
Further, Councilmember Lowe.
Yeah, just a comment about where the confusion lies with the zoning. I don't think the developers are confused, and I'm confused, okay? Because the zoning is very clear, and it is, the C1AR is mixed-use zoning. Is the project mixed use? No. So how are we applying this? It's incongruous, really. It's not confusing. It's just, we're making the argument that this is the appropriate mixed-use zoning. No confusion about how that's defined. A lot of confusion about its application here. And PUDs, I appreciate that, again, in response to another question, that it was noted. I did ask about, why wouldn't we have gone the PUD route? And so thank you, staff, for raising that as an opportunity. But as it states, the developer chose to proceed with the C1AR. And then the Planning Commission concluded that, I'm quoting from the response, that the designation meets the intent of the master plan. So I just think we, maybe need a little tutorial on, is mixed use, can you call it mixed use when 1% is something other than residential? I think this is a residential project, really. Sorry, it just, I don't want to get in the weeds on this, but I don't think it's that confusing for the people who are applying it. It's confusing for this person who's going to be approving it.
perhaps a staff comment on the nature of mixed use?
From a staff review, we shared a lot of the questions that have been brought up as to the mixed usedness of this proposal. In short, our ordinance doesn't say that it shall be 50-50 in order to be called mixed use. Certainly, this is primarily a residential development. We also have community experiences where we have mixed-use developments that they are not mixed use because they are vacant. I think potentially as we get into the site plan process, I'm sure the petitioner will be willing to speak to that, and did at the Planning Commission, that they're, despite community expressions of desire for more commercial, from a market perspective, they don't necessarily see that same extent. One of the things that drives that marketability of more mixed use is more people. And so it's not to say long-term that there aren't opportunities for mixed use elsewhere around this site, elsewhere in the community. I would also echo the comments. I think we do a good job of integrating residential into our commercial districts. We are very limited in our integration of commercial into residential districts. So that's definitely something we can look forward. I think you'll see themes of that as the Planning Commission works through transit corridor zoning that they're starting to look at this year. So, but in short, there's no definitional requirement. We had the same conversations. There are, but there are a lot of aspects into going into determination of how that site should be programmed.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Leonard. And I know that, and what can be financed is, certainly a factor and a driver. And we talked about this project at a recent DDA Partnerships Committee meeting. There was a banker there, and he spoke to, what the industry is financing, and we know the retail world is changing. So that also, ultimately shapes these kinds of mixed-use, projects and what actually is developed on a site.
Councilman Kalasapathy, did you?
Yeah, I think I didn't get the right word before. I just felt it was very disingenuous by calling this mixed use, because we said we didn't have, this was a PUD, so we didn't have the right zoning, and then we say, aha, we found the zoning, and we are calling it C1AR, which is mixed use. We are using it because it kind of comports with the master plan requirement, but then I don't see the mixed use. Maybe if we recognize it for what it is, if it's a residential, recognize for what it is and call it residential and put a residential zoning there, because then at least neighborhoods have certain protections coming with. So I think we are trying to play a double game. That is what really irks me, and that's what everybody who calls me or wants to talk to me about, they feel like we are playing games. Because it's kind of, we have a mixed use. And just saying, yeah, you're right, there's no definitional mixed. But I don't think you'll go into a neighborhood which has 99% one group of ethnic or racial group and 1% of certain minorities. We are going to call that mixed, because that again would be very kind of disingenuous for me. So I think being sincere about these issues, I think, is important. Okay, we don't like cars, that's fine. We can put that out, we can argue it out, and neighbors can tell us whether we are bad neighbors or not, whether we have 2 cars or 1 car. That's fine, we can argue. But to play with the zoning and, we don't have a definition of mixed use, so 0.001% can be mixed. I don't know. This is where I think we need to, because if you call it what it is, maybe then we can bring in the protections that come in with having a predominantly residential. That's where I come from. So thank you.
Councilmember Smith.
Very quickly, I would respectfully disagree with my colleague that it's disingenuous. If it's a residential zoning, then we can't do any commercial there. That's, it restricts that, as Councilmember Crapo pointed out. we have lots of people that want to do commercial and residential, and our code prohibits that. And so, as Mr. Leonard indicated, the Planning Commission will start working on some ways to address that, but I disagree that it's disingenuous. I think it's reflecting what our code allows you to do and doesn't allow you to do.
Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you. Also, just to the notion of mixed use, first I'll say that it's a single use right now, which is vacant land, and that, you know, any construction on it makes it more mixed use than it is currently. But it does contain 4,500 square feet of retail, which can be doubled. You also, when you're talking about, you know, simplifying the conversation down to mixed use as what percentage of the total square feet, you're absolutely right. But even if that was a line of logic that I think was worth exploring, you would have to only be talking about the first floor, because 5-story, 8-story retail buildings don't exist. And then when you consider that, you know, a large percentage of the first floor has to be parking structure because of the floodplain, you're eliminating any chance for retail on the Maiden Lane side of the entire property. So they're working within their constraints. They're bringing the mixed-use retail space closer to the major intersection and further away with its intensity to the neighbors. But at the same time, they have built in some flexibility, and I am hearing what sounds like a majority of my colleagues are saying, which is some more mixed use would be nice. Some more retail would be nice. But also the point that mixed use has to exist squarely within one property, that's great, and you know, the more you can get diversity within a property is great, but also you have to think of the district as a whole. And this area is, you know, to the west, surrounded by single-story commercial buildings, which are ripe for redevelopment. And if we want to talk about a mixed-use district of Lower Town, then you need to get a number of roofs into the area with residential foot traffic in order for any of those commercial properties to be redeveloped. And if you want a grocery store, well, guess what? The number one metric a grocery store looks for is number of roofs within walking distance. So if you want a grocery store near Lower Town, the economics aren't going to be there unless more people are living there. So that's what I would say to mixed use. I think we have to think outside of this parcel. I think it's good to advocate, and I'm hearing a number of my colleagues advocate for it, and luckily, you know, there's a month for staff to talk to the developer about possibilities. But mixed use can't be contained to one site, and it can't be reduced to a percentage of total square feet, because that's just not how buildings are built, and that's not how people shop.
Councilmember Westfall.
He got it for me, thank you.
Further discussion? For my part, I think this has been a quite good conversation. In the end, if I could vote neutral, I'd vote neutral at this point. Yeah. You know, there's a lot about this, about the prospect of a project of material scope here that is plainly obvious, plain and obviously a good.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we have a supply problem with housing in the city, and this will do no small will do no small measure of meeting it. We have a contamination in this area, and this project will surely address it. We have you know, an area that has been fallow for quite some time.
15 years or so.
15 years or so, and while our time horizon is long, I think it's important to note that, you know, 15 years for you know, a vacant land at this site is quite some time. At the same time, I'm you know, quite sensitive to the residents' notions about the building to the north being too massive, and the buildings to the south not having enough of the weight of the not having enough of the weight of the project. That seems to me to be a direction that would be useful to go. I note that you know, I've not had personal experience with the donut. We haven't had a lot of conversation about the donut. I understand that that's outside of the direct context of the zoning, but nevertheless, it is, I think, an unavoidable point of conversation and consideration as we move forward. You know, by having that donut at that site, that creates a fairly massive, squat structure that is atypical in our built environment and is nestled up against an historic district. Now, I understand that there's been some accommodation and some movement, and I appreciate that. I wonder whether that's as far as could be gone. If there is no movement in that regard, if there is no effort to move the weight of the projects to the south, I will then, in the alternative, observe that the 100-foot proposed height limit leaves between 15 and 18 feet, if I recollect correctly, open on the proposed buildings A and C. That said that if there was a new project put forward, that the present 82-foot and 85-foot structures would have a decent amount of headroom that would then be by right. So that, I don't quite understand why we have a proposed condition to one of the structures, but then the proposed conditions that give the other structures a fair bit of headroom. So those are some areas that these raise questions for me. Also, I observed too that we've had some conversations about the materials. The materials of some of the buildings are proposed to be brick, and the buildings of some are not. I'm no architect, but that strikes me as discordant, and certainly that's the communication that I've received from residents, and that discord concerns me. That is to say, the absence of brick and stone throughout. And finally, with respect to mixed use, I do concur that I don't see disingenuity in the amount of mixed use proposed in the site plan. It's hardly a site plan proposed in the concept, but nevertheless, it doesn't meet. Well, let's say I'm interested to hear a little bit more about what the limitations of mixed use on the site, but at least at present, it doesn't meet my aspirations for what would hit the bar of urban village. And those are some of my thoughts on the subject. Further discussion? Roll call vote, please, starting with Councilmember Lum.
Councilmember Lum?
Yes.
Councilmember Graham?
Yes.
Councilmember Ackerman?
Yes.
Mayor Taylor?
Yes.
Councilmember Eaton?
No.
Councilmember Crapel?
Yes.
Councilmember Worbachowski?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Kalasapathy?
No.
Councilmember Frenzel?
No.
Councilmember Westfall?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Anybody mind if we blow through?
Yeah.
We'll keep going?
Yes, keep
All right.
pounding through.
DC 1, resolution to approve a second supplemental agreement for Siller Terrace at Virginia Park, moved by Councilmember Worbachowski, seconded by Councilmember Smith. Discussion, please, of DC 1. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved with 11 council members present, all voting in the affirmative, thus satisfying the 8-vote requirement. DC 2, resolution to support Ann Arbor STEAM at Northside School, application for safe routes to school funding, moved by Councilmember Eaton, seconded by Councilmember Kalasapathy. Discussion of DC 2, Councilmember Eaton.
Yeah. First, I want to thank staff. Last Tuesday, we had a school transportation safety committee where this issue was brought up by the Safe Routes to School group, and they asked that we bring it forward. Staff turned around and had this resolution prepared in just a couple of days, and so I really appreciate their effort doing this. The Safe Routes to School group is doing some really important work addressing some significant deficiencies in our pedestrian safety in town. And in this particular case, they first applied for a grant that funded the study. They brought in a consultant to show them what best practices were. They have held community outreach meetings. They've really done wonderful work with their initial grant. And this is the follow-up portion of it. They're applying for a grant that will help us fund the infrastructure improvements that are needed. And in order to get that grant application in, they need our support. It's, I have to find my place in my notes. So this grant, or this resolution merely supports their grant application. It's important to note that although there will be a grant, that the city will still be on the hook for a portion of the work that's going to be done, and will be the responsible party. For example, one of the things that the grant won't fund is appropriate and necessary illumination of crosswalks. And so we'll have to step up and do that sort of work, and a variety of other parts of the infrastructure improvements. But the fact that we're able to get these grants to leverage the rest of the money is pretty important. And this is a pretty simple resolution just supporting that grant application. So I ask for your approval of this.
Further discussion? Councilmember Kalasapathy.
Yeah, this is just a shout out to Carleen and her crew for all the meetings you have had, and getting parents and the neighborhood to attend the meetings, and working with the neighborhoods. Thank you so much. You make the commute of our kids walk to school safe. So this is primarily, this funding application is primarily for filling the sidewalk gaps and constructing ADA compliant ramps. A similar group worked on the safe routes to Clegg, and now that's just fantastic. So I'm really glad we'll be able to move a lot of children from their homes to school instead of parents dropping them off. So thank you again for the parents group that has been working on this project at North Sites team.
Further discussion? Councilmember Lowe.
Yeah, just, I'd like to thank Councilmember Eaton and for taking the lead on this, and happy to co-sponsor. And I appreciate that Councilmember Kalasapathy gave a shout out to Carleen Colvin Garcia. She has done just yeoman's work on this. We're talking, yeah, easily, obviously a year plus of due diligence, meetings, reports. It's a labor-intensive process, and we did the same thing with the Clegg Safe Walks to School, and so it's always nice to see them, arrive at this point, because the effort that goes into these grant applications is massive, and they did an outstanding job. So it is a great way to supplement city funding for pedestrian safety improvements at our schools. And as Councilmember Kalasapathy said, this request will pay for filling sidewalk gaps and for the ramp improvements that are needed. And as part of the process, MDOT requires that the city indicated support for and commitment to the application. That's what this does. So just again, thanks to the team that pulled this all together. They did a commendable job. So thank you.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved. DC3, resolution to extend the temporary moratorium on ground-mounted solar panels and arrays in the front open space in residential and parking zoning districts. Moved by Councilmember Ackerman, seconded by Councilmember Grand. Discussion, please, of DC3.
Don't you want to say something? Well, if you're not going to say that, I'm going to thank you.
Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council has previously taken an action on this in April of this year. Front yards in residential districts of a certain depth are allowed to have accessory structures built upon them at a maximum height of 21 feet. I think this comes into conflict with, the intention of single-family neighborhoods. And while I'm sure it's of no surprise that I'm not the fiercest of advocate of the sanctity of single-family neighborhoods, I believe if we're going to have them, we should treat them with the respect that they deserve and respect that character and try to protect it where we can. When this ordinance was written, solar panels certainly weren't a consideration, and the idea that solar panels could be put in front yards definitely were not. And so in April, council voted unanimously to put forward a moratorium on permitting ground-mounted solar panels in front yards, it was to last 180 days. That will lapse before our next council meeting, when a ordinance will come before us. The original moratorium called for a potential extension of another 180 days, which this resolution would enact.
Further discussion? Councilmember Lum.
Thank you. I would like to thank Councilmember Ackerman for taking the lead on this, and again, I'm happy to be a co-sponsor. And as just mentioned, the current moratorium on mounted solar arrays in front yards would expire October 14th, before our next meeting. So excellent catch, Councilmember Ackerman. The proposed new ordinance is expected to be presented to council at the next meeting, so passing this provides time for us to consider this without the looming deadline. Plus, in response to my questions this morning, staff indicated there are not any ground-mounted requests in the queue. So extending the moratorium isn't a big issue in that respect. I don't know what level of community understanding there is regarding this change to allow solar arrays in residential front yards. My guess is that not many folks know about it. And so I would encourage the city to do whatever we can to inform and educate the community about this. And as we saw with accessory dwelling units, anytime there's something that could impact the visual character or safety of residential neighborhoods, the level of interest is pretty high. And that's certainly understandable. So it's very important that residents understand exactly what would be allowed in terms of front yard solar arrays under these ordinance changes, where they're allowed, what the restrictions are, the safety precautions, et cetera, et cetera. And I concur wholeheartedly with what Councilmember Ackerman said, that this is in conflict with I view it as being in conflict with the intent of single-family residentially zoned areas. And so it's a very important conversation, but not one for tonight. We're just extending the moratorium that's in place in order to provide the time necessary to have that conversation. So hopefully we all agree and we'll support this. And thank you again, Councilmember Ackerman.
Councilmember Frenzel.
I'll be supporting the extension only so that we don't put anybody in a pinch if someone were to apply. I am not supportive of the idea of prolonging it in general. More solar any place we can get it is critical, and in somebody's front yard is just fine by me, and the fact that that comes in contrast with some people's aesthetic, that as an environmentalist, that doesn't bother me at all.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved. DB1, resolution to approve the McCowan lots 27, 28, and 30 annexation, 2633, 2647, and 2651 Dexter Road, moved by Councilmember Smith, seconded by Councilmember Warpachowski. Discussion, please, of DB1. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved. CA8, resolution to recommend approval of 3-year professional services agreements for engineering services for Parks and Recreation with Smith Group, JJR, Inc., and Rowe Professional Services Company. Moved by Councilmember Eaton, seconded by Councilmember Grand. Discussion, please, of CA8. Councilmember Eaton.
This is a lot of money, and so I would really like that we have a discussion of this. And I have sent the clerk an amendment. I don't care for the practice of us authorizing a contract to be approved before it exists. And so the amendment that I'm proposing would ask that the contract, once it's negotiated, return to council for final approval before being executed. And further, I'm proposing additional resolve clause. Resolve that the amount of this contract will not be used for any purpose related to the design or planning of a train station. I don't think it would be appropriate to use park funds for our train station plans, and I don't think that should be terribly controversial. Our CIP designates our alternative transportation funding as the source for funding for our train station planning.
Is there a second? Oh, actually, I suppose it's been distributed. Can you read your amendment?
Okay. So in the last resolve clause, it currently says, resolve that the mayor and city clerk be authorized and directed to execute said professional services agreement. And I would strike the words mayor and city clerk be authorized and directed to execute said. And instead, it would say that the professional services agreement will be returned to council for final approval after approval as to substance by the city administrator and approval as to form by the city attorney for the amount not to exceed $150,000 per consultant per fiscal year for 3 years. Then the additional clause would say resolved that the amount of this contract will not be used for any purpose related to the design or planning of a train station.
Is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember Lum. Discussion. Councilmember Grand.
I'm really struggling to understand why, well, both of these, actually, the second one just seems honestly ridiculous to me. Parks are not going to use parks funding to design a train station. I guess if it's in there, that's fine, because it's never going to happen. The first piece, the whole point of having these contracts is so if Parks has a small design project, that they can have consultants on staff to help them with those smaller projects and not have to come to council, and can move with sometimes the speed and urgency that's needed with projects, or, you know, Parks projects don't tend to be very controversial at this size, so it just seems unnecessary to come to council. This has been practiced in Parks for a number of years. It was in response to historically when there were once 3 Parks planners, and now we have 1. So having this flexibility, it's an up to designation. It's not, it's very rarely that entire amount at one time. So it doesn't seem necessary to me.
Councilmember Eaton.
So if I can respond, I'm not suggesting that each use of these consultants come back to council, but rather that this particular overall umbrella agreement, the services, the professional services agreement, when it is written and has gone through the review process by the city administrator and the city attorney, that it come back to us for our approval before it's executed. And then, once executed, all of the little projects that come up during this fiscal year would fall within that agreement. My concern is that under section 14.1 of our charter, it says that we have the responsibility as a council to approve all contracts in excess of $25,000. This clearly meets that standard. This is well in excess of $25,000. But instead, we seem to be waiving our approval responsibility and authorizing others to execute it on our behalf. And I don't think that that is a good practice. If ever we get into litigation over the contents of a contract, if we give the other party to the contract any grounds to try to argue that it's not a valid contract because we didn't look at it after it was written under section 14.1, I think that that's a reasonable argument for them to make, and it just adds to the things that we have to litigate. So rather than waive our duty to review a contract, I'm asking that this contract be written, reviewed by the city administrator and the city attorney, come back to us and let us approve an existing contract rather than a hypothetical contract. And once that services agreement is in place, all of the things that you have said that the Parks Department needs to do can be done on a job-by-job basis. Thank you.
May I ask another question to Councilmember Eaton?
Is this
I'd
okay?
like to know what the purpose of the second resolve clause is. I mean, the actual purpose of the second resolve clause.
This is a lot of money. I can't imagine us spending what is it?
1.8 million.
$1.8 million over the next 3 years on little park department contracts.
No, the train station piece.
Hmm?
The train station piece. What's the purpose of the train station result?
So what I'm saying is that this is a lot of money, and I can't imagine anything that will consume $1.8 million other than a train station.
Councilmember Lum.
Thank you. I will support the amendments. I see them as essentially clarifications, and they don't fundamentally change the substance or the intent. By having council approve the final agreements rather than just having them executed by staff, council is performing a bit of due diligence on contracts that is noted in total for both CA8 and CA9 could total 1.8 million over 3 years. I think that's appropriate and doesn't change the basic intent, which is to allow Parks and Rec to pre-qualify firms based on an RFP process for as-needed engineering and architectural work. That's an approach I support, and I agree it's efficient and makes sense for taxpayers. I also think explicitly indicating that no design or planning work related to the train station can be performed under these contracts is appropriate. I think while that may likely not have occurred anyway, it doesn't hurt to make it clear that the work performed should be normal Parks and Rec facility capital work and not for some other purpose. So, again, I'll be supporting these.
Councilmember Frenzel.
Can I ask staff a few questions, please? Can you give us a few examples of size and scope of times in the recent past where we would have utilized this type of funding?
So for one example, over the past recent history, we actually had a larger pool of construction management firms. One was largely dedicated to management of the new barrier-free play structure at Gallup Park. So that's an example of the type of work that we would engage these firms to help oversee, as well as smaller scale projects as well. This proposed arrangement of contractors actually drops us back down to just 2 architectural firms and 2 engineering project management firms from the previous 3 and 2.
Mm-hmm. Can you give us a few dollar amounts roughly on a couple of those recently passed projects?
I can. In fiscal 17, the total spent on the 2 architect firms were $18,700, and for another firm was $84,270. For project management, one was $137,000, and another was $20,000.
In your experience, how routine are these types of projects that we would be potentially looking at in the future that these would cover?
We tend to use these services on an annual basis, as was described earlier, because this is a very efficient way for us to conduct these projects without maintaining a full in-house staff to do those. So it's very efficient for us to be able to keep our capital investments up in the park on a routine basis by using these kind of consultant arrangements.
Maybe, thank you, Mr. Leonard, maybe for you, maybe for the city administrator. Can you explain to us the efficiency that the organization creates by through this process?
Sure. These are they support small construction modification projects where the participation of an engineer or an architect is required. Most of those are of a small value. They wouldn't come to council anyway. So this just helps expedite the process because most of the work would be under $25,000 limit anyway for professional services. I think in a competitive environment, it locks in the support that we need. At times, it's hard to get engineers and architects to put in offers for small individual projects because it's just not worth their time and effort to do that. So speed of execution is certainly an asset. The efficiency in getting it done and the
building the relationship with certain firms so they know what to expect, and what we expect is important. And to be honest, it declutters the procurement. We have a procurement staff of one person, so it certainly declutters his workload as well.
And lastly, I believe, my presumption was that most of the stuff that you were going to look at was below 25 or something of that
Well,
nature.
the design is, construction may not be. So council actually has a bite at the apple on the projects anyway. I personally don't have any objection to the comment about train station, because we weren't going to use it for the train station anyway. It's for existing facilities. So, yeah, I don't object to that comment, but I don't know that's particularly, it doesn't impact what we're going to do either way. So if that gives council some measure of comfort, I don't object to it.
Thank you.
Councilmember Westfall.
My question's been answered. Thank you.
Councilmember Kalasapathy.
So I just want to make sure I understand what's going on. So according to Councilmember Eaton's amendments, basically we are going to see a contract, right? It's not like individual contracts are going to come back to us. We are going to see for each of these 4 vendors, whatever contracts that's going to be executed is going to come here, and we are going to see their billing rate, the overhead rate, billing cycle, blah, 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 all the nuance, all the details that were going to be written out and signed is going to come to us, and we are going to see it. But this is in no way every $20 they are spending on something is going to come back to us, right? We are just going to see 4 contracts on a fiscal year basis up to $150,000. So there will be $600,000 contracts broken up into 4 for the 4 vendors and coming back to us. Is that right?
I believe so.
Okay, thank you.
Further discussion? Councilmember Lum.
Yeah, just, we've used this approach for a lot of years, and I think this pre-qualifying approach does make sense. And with CA8, the RFP that was issued, 8 firms responded. These 2 are recommended. On CA9, 10 firms responded. These 2 are recommended. So again, we're pre-qualifying, and this does not, this still allows, the Parks and Rec to pre-qualify firms. Again, I think that's a good approach. It is efficient. So the amendments don't change that. I just want to make that point again.
Further discussion? Councilmember Wojciechowski.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. I'm still trying to make sure I understand the base resolution and what the amendment would do. As I understand Councilmember Eaton's description of his proposed amendment, it's based on a premise that, based on this RFP, we would create 2 different professional services agreements, one with each firm, and that those would be executed to create a framework for these small jobs within those professional service agreements. As I understood what Councilmember Eaton was describing is that rather than just authorizing those without seeing those overarching professional service agreements, we would be asking for those professional service agreements to come back to council. Council would vote, assuming we approve those professional service agreements, then staff would be able to move forward with the with those 2 firms for all these smaller projects that were covered within the professional service agreement. Councilmember Eaton, is that is that a fair characterization of your description of the proposed amendment?
Yes.
City Administrator, does this description of the impact of the proposed amendment, is that an accurate reflection of what your understanding of the amendment would do?
Well, I'm not 100% certain what the difference is, because we've already solicited the agreements and they're being brought here for execution anyway. So maybe it's a better legal question to answer, but I'm not really sure what the first amendment does versus where we are now, since we've already gone out for offers.
I'm sorry, I didn't see a contract attached to the agenda.
Well, I can't speak towards what the final contract, but the RFP did have a sample contract attached to it, which is our standard professional
Right.
services agreement.
So all of the details have been negotiated and reviewed for substance and form by the city administrator and the city attorney?
No, I wouldn't say that. I was simply saying that there was a sample contract attached with the general provisions that the city uses. And
Okay, so if I could then, if the desire is to, rather than approve the contracts in a general nature, to have us bring them back specifically with each one approved, and we can do a specific contract to its form presented back, and we can do that at the next council meeting, that I don't have an issue what's being amended, if that makes, I hope I'm not confusing the situation anymore. But I'm fine either way, to be honest.
Perhaps what is needed here is a postponement to allow the professional services agreements to be moved from sample to final, and we can move on from there. Is that-
And I'm fine with that, Mayor.
That timeframe all right on legal?
yes.
Motion postponed
I would so move.
by Councilman Reed and seconded by Councilman Kalasapathy to our next meeting.
I'm sorry, are we postponing the amendment or are we postponing the
Oh, that's a
motion?
good point.
Yeah,
Let's
we have to
withdraw the
withdraw the
amendment.
amendment.
And postpone the main item.
I withdraw the amendment,
Is
And-
that all right with the body? It is now the bodies.
and now I propose postponing this until the next meeting.
Thank you. Seconded by Councilmember Kalasapathy. Thank you. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved. CA 9, which I suspect will rhyme with the other result, resolution to approve 3-year professional services agreement for architectural services for parks and recreation with Mitchell and Moat Architects and Kohler Architects, moved by Councilmember Eaton, seconded by Councilmember Kalasapathy. Discussion, please, of CA 9, Councilmember Eaton.
I would move to postpone this because of the same reason.
all the foregoing
Yeah,
reasons.
For all of the
Seconded by Councilmember Kalasapathy. Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It too is postponed until our next meeting. Do we have communications today from our indomitable city attorney?
Which one?
No, Mayor. We have before us the clerk's report of communications, petitions, and referrals. May I have a motion, please, to approve the clerk's report? Moved by Councilmember Lum, seconded by Councilmember Ackerman. Discussion, please, of the clerk's report. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The clerk's report is approved. We now come to public comment general time. Public comment general time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters of municipal interest. To speak in public comment general time, one need not have signed up in advance. Speakers have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time clock. As a matter of courtesy, we may have only one person speaking at a time. And finally, if you require assistance in speaking before council, we'd be delighted to provide it to you. Is there anyone today who would like to speak in public comment?
Hi, my name is Lisa Abrams. I'm in Ward 3. Today is Mahatma Gandhi's birthday, and it is celebrated around the world as Nonviolence Day. How fitting to be addressing you on Nonviolence Day, as our country struggles with yet more gun violence in Las Vegas, and we at home in Ann Arbor struggle with the same gun violence targeted on our deer. We implore you to open your hearts and your minds to seek nonviolent public policy solutions to our perceived problem. In 2 weeks, we urge you all to vote no for additional monies for deer management above and beyond the $260,000 you already approved for this winter. The vendor has suggested killing 350 deer this winter and extending the killing, Zach Ackerman and Julie Grand, to County Farm Park, which is Ward 3, to Pioneer High School, Jack Eaton and Graydon, that's in Ward 4, and to Mary Beth Doyle Park. Here is a photo of a New York City wildlife campaign on billboards and cabs throughout the 5 boroughs. Here is the deer being referred to as a New Yorker with the mayor's office Message, learn to live alongside deer. City dwellers take many forms. Progressive cities are leading the way, proving that nonviolent solutions and coexisting with nature makes good public policy. We recently asked nonviolent scholars in the same tradition of Mahatma Gandhi about the deer versus plant issue in Ann Arbor. They explained that deer have 5 senses: touch, taste, smell, sight, and hearing. Plants have 1 sense, touch. Our duty is to safeguard the 5 sense living beings, the highest form of living beings. Nature has its own way of taking care of things, they explained. We shouldn't go in the wrong direction. We don't have to manipulate, they said. We don't have to meddle with nature. We shouldn't feel we are the gods. We are the superpowers. We can do whatever we want. These scholars assured us nature has its own process, and they asked of Ann Arbor, where is the compassion? Where is the nonviolence? Cities practicing nonviolence like New York will thrive because it is a universal law. What we give out comes back to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at public comment?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 2 weeks ago, I brought this poster in to the council showing the roof of the 4th and William parking structure from which a young man had jumped a few weeks earlier, and warned, I think, that there was a contagion of suicides from parking structures. I learned a few hours ago that another young person, I don't know who, jumped from this very structure. Now, you did act 2 weeks ago, but we now know, I think, that it was not enough. The contagion continues. I offered an estimate that this roof alone would have cost $20,000 to enclose with a chain link fence. Maybe $24,000, I found later, if you used finer mesh. After your resolution, I talked with Susan Pauley, who said, well, she got the urgency, but anything over $20,000, and of course she has many structures, has to be sent out for competitive bidding. You have to send it to the consultant who will redraft the bids to make more flexible than the last time. The bids will come in, et cetera, et cetera. Nothing that anyone could have done in the past 2 weeks would have prevented today's tragedy. But this is an emergency, and I'm here to urge you, find some way to cut the red tape. You have proposals before you, $150,000 for this and different amounts. She's saying we can't do anything under $20,000 without competitive bidding. Find some way, waive the rule, parcel it down so nothing goes out over $19,999, and it takes a number of purchases to do the whole job for all 5 or 6 structures and more than 1 floor. If you lived in a home with a depressed child, you would not leave a loaded gun on the kitchen table. In our collective home, our city, there are many depressed people, and there are many guns on tables, and there are tables that we as a city own. So please treat this as an emergency and find some way to cut the red tape and get something started as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at public comment?
Mr. Mayor, esteemed members of the council, my name is Barry Powers. I'm with Cranbrook Law Group. I'm an attorney with that law firm in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. I don't live in Ann Arbor. I have a son who attends the University of Michigan, but he's 18. He can speak for himself. But I have been asked by certain members of your constituency to speak to you tonight on the matter of the deer call. I don't know that there was anything on the agenda tonight, but I understand that this is still a matter that is brewing. I want to direct your attention, please, to the flags that stand behind you. One is the flag of the United States of America. The other is a flag of the state of Michigan. We shouldn't lose sight of those flags. I know there's a lot of talk about flags now, but those are very important symbols that guide us and should remind us all as we stand here and sit here today. Each one of you took an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States, to uphold the Constitution of the state of Michigan. Mr. Postimo will back me up on this, my esteemed colleague. Many of you took an oath not just as members of the City Council, but also as lawyers yourselves. Why is that important? Why is it for me to remind you of this? And why do you sit there and think, why is this guy lecturing me on the Constitution of the United States? I'm a duly elected official. Why do I have to listen to this? This is why, because you are a government. If an individual, a free man or woman in our society wants to do something, they can't do it unless there's a law against it. But you are a government of limited powers. You have a charter with enumerated powers. So you have to find a law, a constitution that founds that power before you can do it. So it's the opposite of whatever every free man and woman is entitled to do. Where in your charter do you have the power to regulate and control wildlife in the state of Michigan? I put it all to you as a rhetorical question because I can't force you to answer the question. But I ask you to search your conscience and remember your oath. You won't find it in the Michigan Constitution. The reason you won't find it in the Michigan Constitution is the Michigan Constitution does speak to this, and it vests the power over wildlife regulation in the state legislature of our state of Michigan. You may say, we're going to get a permit from the DNR. If that permit is in contravention of the Constitution, if it's in contravention of the state legislature's enactments, then you are violating that oath of office. You are acting in an illegitimate way. When you sit here and talk about zoning and matters of purely local interest, that is when you're at your best. But when you wander too far away to the perimeter of your powers, that's when you flirt with illegitimacy. I beg you not to act illegitimately on behalf of my clients, your constituents. It's not a matter of referendum. It doesn't matter whether it's 99-1, 51-50. It's a constitutional point.
Thank you.
My name is Edward Vilmetti. I'd like to speak to you about the procurement process. You had one conversation on the agenda tonight about procurement on the city level for consultants. I'm speaking more to the DDA's procurement process, which is not strictly your purview, but given recent events, I think it's something you should pay attention to. The DDA, like most city-like bodies, has several options open to it to send out bids for potential contracts. One of them is called MITN, Michigan Intergovernmental Trade Network. Those sorts of RFPs used regularly by the city. They're published publicly on a public website. They're shared widely. There's a lot of people who see them, a lot of qualified people who bid on them. The DDA, in their search for a parking contractor, did not avail themselves of this method. Rather, they went through one consulting firm that they had hired in the hopes of getting the structural improvements to the parking structures for safety. I know that procurement is something I do not understand. It seems to take a long time. There seems to be a lot of bureaucracy. I have never been part of a successful bid for a government contract, nor am I ever likely to be. But I would say that it's important that this body take note of the ability to execute contracts and take note of its ability to exercise control and oversight over the DDA, and see to it that the work that gets done to protect our structures and to protect the people who come to and live in this city is done expeditiously and is done with as much openness as is possible under the circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you.
Broadway. I live kind of near it. I'm all in favor of it, just make it look good. There's not enough supply in the area. My apartment keeps jacking up the rates a lot every year. I want more apartments in that area and whatnot, because I want some competition. Suicides. I've had the unfortunate experience of witnessing two, one at a U of M parking lot, and one at my apartment complex. I'd encourage City Council or whoever would do this to reach out to U of M, talk to them as well, and get them involved somehow. I know they can do whatever they want, but you know, it doesn't hurt to try at least there. I saw something very nice at City Council, I think it was 2 weeks ago, something I've never seen really before, where a lady came up to speak and they were talking out of turn and all that stuff, and you guys, you know, it's a point of order kind of thing, and it was one of the nicest things I ever saw, where, you know, there's times to bend the rules, and, you know, like, hey, come back and talk, and I thought that was a very, very nice thing to do. One of the nicest things I've seen at council. Last thing I'll say, American Horror Story. There's a character named Kai in that show who speaks, that show is based in Michigan. I'm the only Kai that I know of in all of Michigan that speaks at City Council, and that's what that person does, Kai, Michigan City Council. If those guys are listening, I want to go to your set, because I'm the only one I know of in the city. So if that character is based on me, who wears blue hair, you know, I want some credits or something. Here, come on. Anyway, have a good night.
Thank you.
That's a hard act to follow. Kathy Griswold. I want to talk about 3 terms that are taught in the University of Michigan MBA program. The first one is right size, the second one is supply and demand, and the third is opportunity costs. Right size. Starbucks today discontinued their online business. Ann Arbor, we always talk about growth, 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 density, density, it's all good. But we need to think about right-sizing Ann Arbor, not just always growing it and having more density. A complaint was filed with the EPA due to the sewer odors that are repeatedly coming from our sewer treatment facility. I don't know why, but we need to right-size the organization. Number 2, supply and demand. The supply and demand curve is only relevant when your supply can meet your demand. When your supply is always going to be greater than your demand, it's really not. I'm sorry, when your demand is always going to be greater than your supply, which it is in cities like Ann Arbor and Austin. Trying to match the two is never going to happen, so it's irrelevant. The third one is opportunity costs. Opportunity costs are defined as the loss of potential gain from alternatives when one alternative is chosen. We talk about 81 million for the train station, but the real loss is not the dollars, it's the opportunity cost, because we weren't focusing on what was important. And as a result, we've had loss of life and serious injuries, including the loss today. We need to focus on what's really important in this community. And it isn't just the train station. And we need to balance maintaining our community with focusing on growing it and getting flashy new things. Transportation funds have been spent on train consultants and not on pedestrian safety. But also the focus of staff and council have been on projects. It hasn't been on the DDA fence. It hasn't been on crosswalk illumination. Fifth and community. We know that's a problem at community high school, but we haven't gotten the job done. Fifth and Beeks, someone is going to be killed or seriously injured, and we're going to talk about our intent to fix the problem, but it won't matter when someone is dead. And the last one is the Packard Crosswalk near US 23, which I've repeatedly mentioned. It's not illuminated. It's irresponsible in this community. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at public comment? Seeing no one, public comment is closed. Do we have a closed session today?
Yes, we do, Mayor. We have a closed session based on the Open Meeting Act, and it is for pending litigation.
We have a motion, please, to go into closed session. Moved by Councilor Eaton, second by Councilmember Crapol. Discussion? Roll call vote. Please start with Councilmember Lum.
Councilmember Lum?
Yes.
Councilmember Grand? Yes. Councilmember Ackerman,
Yes.
Mayor Taylor,
Yes.
Councilmember Eaton,
Yes.
Councilmember Crapo,
Yes.
Councilmember Worbachowski,
Yes.
Councilmember Smith,
Sure.
Councilmember Kalasapati, Councilmember Frenzel, Councilmember Westfall, motion carries.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? We are back in open session. May I have a motion, please, to reopen the agenda? Moved by Councilmember Lum, seconded by Councilmember Grand. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The agenda is reopened. Motion, please, to amend the agenda. Moved by Councilmember Warpahowski, seconded by Councilmember Frenzel. Discussion? All in favor? Oh, wait,
Aye.
so he's going to do it to add?
Yes. I move to add to the agenda a resolution approving settlement of Resource Recovery Systems LLC and FCR LLC v. City of Ann Arbor, Eastern District of Michigan, case number 16-CV-12771.
Perhaps read the body?
Okay. Body will be resolved that the city settle the case entitled Resource Recovery Systems LLC and FCR LLC v. City of Ann Arbor, Eastern District of Michigan, case number 16-CV-12771 as follows, and set out in more detail in the settlement agreement and release negotiated between the parties. Point 1. Plaintiffs dismiss and release with prejudice all claims, including all claims they brought in or could have brought against the city in the lawsuit. 2, the city released with prejudice all claims, including the claims it submitted against the surety bond for the contract, and all the claims they brought or could have brought against the plaintiffs in the lawsuit. 3, the city's right to indemnification and to coverage as a third party insured under the contract for claims arising under the contract remain in effect. Resolved that the city administrator be authorized to take any
Attorney.
steps necessary to finalize this settlement and to obtain dismissal of the lawsuit.
The city, that is the resolve of the city attorney be so
Attorney.
I'm sorry,
authorized.
city attorney, thank you.
Seconded by Councilmember Smith. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved. May I have a motion, please, to adjourn? Moved by Councilmember Crapel, seconded by Councilmember Westfall. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? We are adjourned.